Let's compare two different texture pastes from Ranger. One is opaque matte and one is transparent gloss. When I'm using texture paste, I like to use a palette knife, and I often do it through a stencil, but you don't have to do it through a stencil. You can also mix different mediums to color these texture pastes or mica powders. They're really easy to mix, and I just mix them onto the side of my palette. I use my palette knife to grab a little bit of the texture paste, and when I'm putting it through the stencil, I try to make it even with the top of the stencil so that I've got an even amount and even thickness throughout my whole piece. Any extra texture paste, if it's not colored, can just be put right back into the jar, and I typically like to close the jar as soon as I'm done so it prevents drying. There's a little bit more thickness to the opaque texture paste, and there's also a little bit more tooth to it. So if you decide not to add colorant to it before you put it through your stencil, you can also add colorants to it afterwards because it will hold it because of that tooth. Whereas the transparent gloss, it ends up being too glossy and shiny. You wouldn't be able to add anything over it to color that actual texture paste, but you could use it as a resist. Once I'm done putting my texture paste through the stencil, I like to wash my stencil as well as my palette knives immediately while that texture paste is still wet. If you wait for it to dry, you chance ruining your stencil trying to get it off. And we definitely don't do that. When I'm washing off the texture paste off the stencil and the palette knife, I just like to run it under some room temperature tap water. I don't even use soap. I let my pieces completely dry for at least an hour, and this is what they look like. The white opaque stays bright white, and the transparent gloss goes clear and glossy. Both great choices for your projects depending on the look that you're going for.